It is the autumn of 1847. A family of 5 is standing at the edge of the Willamette Valley after 6 months on the Oregon Trail. They have no general store within 200 miles, no doctor, no blacksmith, no neighbors close enough to shout to. Everything they will eat, build, wear, and heal with this winter will come from their own 2 hands and whatever they learned before they left Missouri. And here is the part that should shake you. They made it. Most of them made it. Not because they were tougher than you, not because they had some superhuman pain tolerance. They made it because they carried a set of skills in their heads that we have almost completely erased from civilian memory in less than 2 generations. What if I told you that the 20 skills that kept pioneer families alive through famine, blizzard, drought, and war are being quietly rediscovered right now by a new generation of preppers who realized that gear fails, batteries die, and supply chains snap. But knowledge, real knowledge, the kind your great-great-grandmother passed down while skinning a deer, that knowledge never runs out of charge. That is exactly what I am going to show you today. 20 buried pioneer skills that modern preppers are pulling back from the edge of extinction. We are going from the foundational, the ones every homesteader knew by heart, all the way up to the single skill that makes every other one on this list actually work. And I will tell you right now, stick around for number 12, because what the pioneers called liquid gold of the forest is something 99% of modern preppers have never even heard of. And number 20. Number 20 is the one I saved for last, because without it, the other 19 are just tricks. With it, they become a system that can keep your family alive when everything else falls apart. Before we get into it, if you are the kind of person who takes preparation seriously, who understands that self-reliance is not a phase, it is a responsibility, then hit that subscribe button right now and tap that bell. I put out content every week that your grandparents would have recognized and your kids need to learn. All right, let us get into it. Here are 20 buried pioneer skills modern preppers are rediscovering, ranked from essential to absolutely critical. Number 1, fire by bow drill, the skill that separated the living from the frozen. Let me take you back to a January night in 1846. The Donner Party is stranded in the Sierra Nevada. Snow is piling up past the wagon wheels. They have matches, but the matches are soaked. They have flint, but the tinder is wet. And in that moment, the difference between warmth and hypothermia, between cooked food and raw frozen meat, between hope and despair, comes down to a single question. Does anyone in this group know how to make fire with nothing but wood in their hands? The bow drill is not a novelty. It is not a bushcraft party trick. It is the oldest reliable fire-starting method known to the human species, and the U.S. Army still teaches it in FM 21-76, the survival manual, as a primary field method when modern ignition fails. Here is how it works. You need 4 components: a fireboard, a spindle, a bow, and a bearing block. The bow spins the spindle against the fireboard at roughly 80 to 120 rotations per minute. That friction generates heat. When the contact point reaches approximately 800 degrees Fahrenheit, 427 Celsius, the wood dust in the notch of the fireboard ignites into a coal. You transfer that coal to a tinder bundle, blow it to flame, and you have fire. Sounds simple? It is not. The wood selection alone will make or break you. Cottonwood, willow, cedar, basswood. Those work. Oak, maple, pine. You will grind yourself to exhaustion and never see smoke. The spindle and fireboard need to be the same species of wood, or close to it. The moisture content has to be low, and your form, the downward pressure, the speed of the bow stroke, the angle of the spindle, all of it has to be coordinated, or you will blister your hands before you ever see an ember. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia have been using friction fire methods for over 60,000 years. 60,000. That makes the bow drill older than agriculture, older than writing, older than every civilization that has ever existed. Daniel Boone carried a flint and steel kit, but every frontiersman worth his buckskin knew the bow drill as a backup. Because flint breaks, steel rusts. But the knowledge of how to coax fire from dead wood with nothing but pressure and speed, that lives between your ears, and nobody can take it from you. Modern preppers are buying ferro rods and plasma lighters, and those are fine tools. But if you cannot make fire without any tool at all, you have a hobby, not a skill. Number 2. Pemmican making. The original MRE, perfected 3,000 years before the Pentagon ever stamped a date on a pouch. When Meriwether Lewis and William Clark set out in 1804 to cross a continent that no American of European descent had ever mapped, they did not pack freeze-dried meals. They packed pemmican, dried lean meat, usually bison or elk, pounded into a powder and mixed with rendered fat and sometimes dried berries. That is it. 3 ingredients. And that mixture, properly prepared and sealed, lasted anywhere from 10 to 50 years. Let that sink in. 50 years of shelf life with 0 refrigeration, 0 preservatives, 0 packaging technology. The caloric density of properly made pemmican runs about 3,500 kilocalories per kilogram. That is roughly double the caloric density of most commercial trail bars. The Inuit made a variation with seal fat that sustained them through Arctic winters where temperatures dropped to -40. The Cree and Métis nations traded pemmican as a staple currency across the northern plains. The Hudson Bay Company built an entire economy around it. Here is what most people get wrong when they try to make pemmican today. They use store-bought jerky. That is a mistake. Jerky still contains moisture, and moisture is the enemy of long-term preservation. Real pemmican starts with meat, dried so thoroughly that it snaps like a twig when you bend it. Then you pound it, not chop it, not grind it in a blender. You pound it with a stone or a mallet until it becomes a fibrous powder. Then you render fat, slowly, at low heat, strain out the solids, and mix the liquid fat into the meat powder at a ratio of roughly 1:1 by weight. You can add dried blueberries or Saskatoon berries if you want, but the base is meat and fat, nothing else. Pack it into a rawhide container or a vacuum-sealed bag, and you have a food source that outlasts every crisis in your lifetime. The Ranger Handbook lists caloric requirements for soldiers in the field at 3,500 to 4,500 calories per day under heavy exertion. 1 kilogram of pemmican covers a full day. No cooking required, no water needed, no fire necessary. That is why it survived 3 millennia. It works. Number 3, natural cordage from plant fibers, the invisible tool that held the frontier together. Here is something that will shift how you think about survival. Every snare, every shelter lashing, every fishing line, every bowstring, every bundle tie, every piece of stitching on a pioneer homestead required one thing: cordage, rope, string. And when you are 200 miles from the nearest general store and your last coil of hemp rope just rotted through, you either know how to make cordage from plants or you watch your shelter collapse in the next windstorm. Dogbane, stinging nettle, milkweed, yucca, basswood bark, cattail leaves. These were the raw materials. The process is called reverse wrapping. You harvest the plant, strip the outer fibers, let them dry slightly, then split a bundle in 2, twist each half clockwise, and wrap them around each other counterclockwise. The opposing twists lock together under tension. A single 2-ply cord of dogbane fiber, twisted properly, can hold 50 to 90 pounds of weight. The SAS Survival Guide lists natural cordage as a critical skill tier, right alongside fire and shelter, because without it, you cannot build half of what you need to stay alive. Jim Bridger, one of the most legendary mountain men of the 1820s and 30s, reportedly carried less than 10 feet of manufactured rope at any given time. He did not need more. He made the rest from whatever grew around him. The skill takes practice. Your first attempts will be ugly, loose, and weak. But after 20 or 30 feet of practice cord, your hands learn the rhythm. Twist, wrap, twist, wrap. And once your hands know it, they never forget it. That is the thing about pioneer skills. They live in your muscle memory, not your gear closet. Number 4, flint knapping. When your knife breaks, this is all you have left. There is a reason our species used stone tools for over 2 million years before we figured out metal, stoneworks, specifically cryptocrystalline stones like flint, chert, obsidian, and jasper fracture in predictable ways when struck at the correct angle. A skilled napper can produce a cutting edge from obsidian that measures roughly 3 nanometers wide at the tip. For context, a surgical steel scalpel blade is about 30 nanometers. Obsidian is 10 times sharper. The pioneers did not routinely knap stone. They carried steel knives. But the mountain men who lived deep in uncharted territory, men like Jedediah Smith, who became the first American to cross the Sierra Nevada by land in 1827, understood that steel breaks, steel dulls, steel gets lost in a river crossing. And when it does, the man who can pick up a piece of flint and turn it into a blade in 15 minutes is the man who eats that night. The basic method is called percussion flaking. You hold a core stone in one hand and strike the edge with a hammerstone at roughly a 30-degree angle. Each strike peels off a flake with a razor edge. For finer work, you switch to pressure flaking, using a pointed antler tip to press small flakes off the edge. The learning curve is real. You will cut yourself. You will shatter cores. You will waste good stone. But the skill is coming back. Modern preppers are attending knapping workshops across the country because they understand that in a long-term grid-down scenario, stone tools are not primitive. They are permanent. Stone does not rust. Stone does not need sharpening the way steel does. And the raw material is literally under your feet. Number 5. Dead reckoning navigation. How pioneers crossed a continent without GPS. When John Charles Fremont led his mapping expeditions across the American West between 1842 and 1844, he did not have satellite coverage. He had a compass, a watch, and his own ability to estimate distance traveled based on pace count and terrain. That is dead reckoning. You start from a known point, track your direction of travel, estimate your distance, and plot your position relative to where you started. The U.S. Army still teaches dead reckoning in the Ranger Handbook as a primary land navigation skill. The method requires 3 things: a direction of travel, which you can get from a compass, from the North Star, from the sun's arc, or even from a stick shadow on flat ground. A pace count, which is the number of steps you take over a measured distance, typically 100 meters. And terrain association, the ability to match what you see around you to the topography you expect based on your movement. A trained navigator can maintain roughly 90% accuracy over 50 miles using dead reckoning alone. Sacagawea guided Lewis and Clark across territories she had not seen since childhood, partly from memory and partly from reading the land itself. River confluences, mountain profiles, prevailing wind patterns, vegetation changes. These are data points. The land is a map if you know how to read it. Modern preppers are realizing that a GPS unit with a dead battery is a paperweight, but the ability to navigate by sun, stars, and terrain is a battery that never dies. FM 2176 devotes an entire chapter to navigation without instruments. There is a reason for that. The military knows that electronics fail in the field. The pioneers knew it 200 years earlier. Number 6. Hide tanning and buckskin craft. The mountain man's armor. There is a reason Daniel Boone wore buckskin and not cotton. Cotton gets wet, stays wet, loses all insulating value, and rots. Buckskin, properly brain-tanned, is water-resistant, windproof, breathable, silent in the brush, and can last 5 to 10 years of hard use with basic maintenance. A single deer hide takes about 6 to 8 hours of labor to process from raw skin to finished buckskin using the brain tanning method, and every pioneer family knew this process by heart. Here is the method. Flesh the hide, removing all meat and fat. Stretch and dry it. Soak it in a solution of the animal's own brain matter mixed with water. Every mammal carries enough brain to tan its own hide. That is not folklore, that is chemistry. The lecithin in the brain penetrates the collagen fibers and lubricates them, keeping the hide soft after drying. Then you wring it, stretch it, work it back and forth over a staking beam until it dries soft, and finally smoke it over a smoldering hardwood fire. The smoking sets the tan. Without smoking, the hide will stiffen again if it gets wet. With smoking, it stays supple for years. The Highland Scots used a similar brain tanning method for centuries in the Scottish Highlands, producing leather for everything from boots to water bags. It is the same principle across continents. Modern preppers are reviving this skill because in a sustained grid-down scenario, your synthetic clothing will eventually wear out. When it does, the deer in your woods become your clothing store, but only if you know how to process the hide. Number 7. Root cellaring. Underground refrigeration that powered families through every winter before electricity existed. If you have ever wondered how pioneer families fed themselves from November through March without a refrigerator, this is your answer. A root cellar is nothing more than a hole in the ground, lined or unlined, that exploits the Earth's natural insulation to maintain a stable temperature between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 to 4 Celsius, year-round. At that temperature range, root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, and parsnips last 4 to 6 months. Apples last 2 to 3 months. Cabbages wrapped in newspaper last nearly as long. During the Great Depression, root cellars were not quaint relics. They were the difference between eating and starving for millions of rural American families. USDA extension bulletins from the 1930s provided detailed blueprints for small-scale root cellars that a single family could dig in a weekend with hand tools. The design is simple. Dig down 4 to 6 feet, deep enough to get below the frost line. Frame the walls with stone, timber, or even packed earth. Install a ventilation pipe to allow airflow and prevent moisture buildup. Build a door that seals against the cold, but is not airtight. And you have a refrigerator that runs on physics and requires 0 electricity. Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 8, says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways, and be wise. It stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." That is root cellaring. That is the ant's wisdom applied at human scale. Real quick, I want to pause here for a moment. We have covered 7 skills so far, and every single one of them requires exactly $0 of gear to execute if you have the knowledge. That is the point. People always ask me, should I buy more gear or learn more skills? And I always say the same thing. Gear is a multiplier. Skills are the base number. If your base number is 0, it does not matter how big your multiplier is. 0 times anything is still 0. If you are getting value from this, do me a favor and check the description below. I have put links to resources, field manuals, and practice guides for every skill on this list. And share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone in your family, someone in your circle, because this information is not going to teach itself. We are only getting started. The skills coming up next are the ones most people have never heard of, and number 20, the one I saved for the very end, is the one that ties all of this together in a way you might not expect. Let us keep going. Number 8. Lye soap from wood ash. The hygiene weapon that prevented more deaths than any rifle on the frontier. Here is a statistic that most people never learn. During the American Civil War, roughly twice as many soldiers died from disease as died from combat wounds. Dysentery, typhoid, gangrene, Infections that modern antibiotics handle in days killed hundreds of thousands of men in camp, not on the battlefield. And the single greatest preventive measure? Soap. Basic soap. Union Army medical records show that regiments that enforced soap production and hand-washing protocols saw infection rates drop by roughly 40% compared to those that did not. Pioneer families made soap the same way for centuries. You burn hardwood, oak or hickory preferred, collect the white ash, and run water through it to produce lye, which is potassium hydroxide. Then you combine the lye water with rendered animal fat at the right concentration and temperature. The chemical reaction, called saponification, produces soap. No factory, no supply chain, no ingredients you cannot find within a mile of any homestead. The whole process takes about a day. The SAS Survival Guide references field hygiene as one of the top 5 survival priorities, right alongside water and shelter. Because in a sustained crisis, it is not the dramatic threats that kill you, it is the invisible ones. Bacteria, infection, contaminated hands touching food. Soap is your first line of defense, and lye soap from wood ash is the version that never goes out of stock. Number 9. Charcloth making. The fire starter your great-grandfather carried in his tin pocket box and never thought twice about. If the bow drill is the foundation of friction fire, charcloth is the foundation of spark fire. It is the bridge between a spark and a flame, the missing piece that most modern fire kits leave out completely. Charcloth is simply cotton or linen fabric that has been heated in the absence of oxygen until it carbonizes. The result is a thin, black, incredibly fragile material that catches a single spark from flint and steel and holds a glowing ember long enough for you to transfer it to a tinder bundle and blow it into fire. The process takes about 15 minutes. Put scraps of natural fiber cloth, cotton works best, into a small metal tin with a single hole punched in the lid. Set the tin on hot coals. Smoke will pour from the hole as the volatile compounds burn off. When the smoke stops, pull the tin off the fire and plug the hole. Let it cool completely before opening. Inside, you will find perfect charcloth, each piece ready to catch a spark on the first strike. Every mountain man from the 1820s through the 1840s carried a tinderbox with charcloth, a piece of flint, and a carbon steel striker. Jim Bridger reportedly kept his tinderbox oiled and dry, even when everything else he owned was soaked from a river crossing. Because fire was not optional. Fire was life. And charcloth was the fastest, most reliable way to get from spark to flame in under 30 seconds. Modern ferro rods throw a shower of sparks at over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and they are excellent tools. But a flint and steel kit with good charcloth works in wind, works in cold, and works when your ferro rod is at the bottom of a river. That is why preppers are bringing charcloth back. Number 10. Primitive snaring and trapping. Protein while you sleep. There is a reason the Ranger Handbook devotes more pages to trapping than to hunting. Hunting is active. It requires a weapon, ammunition, skill, patience, energy expenditure, and a fair amount of luck. Trapping is passive. You set a snare in the evening on a game trail, and by morning, something has walked into it while you were resting, conserving calories, working on shelter, or purifying water. One hunter covers one location at one time. 10 snares cover 10 locations around the clock. The basic figure 4 deadfall uses nothing but 3 sticks carved to interlock under tension, supporting a heavy flat rock. A rabbit or squirrel nudges the bait stick. The tension releases and the rock drops. No wire needed, no metal needed. A simple drag snare made from natural cordage placed across a well-used game trail with a pencil-diameter loop will catch a rabbit if the loop is about 4 inches in diameter and set about 3 inches off the ground. The Cree and Ojibwe nations ran trap lines of 100 or more snares through the winter forests. That is not hunting. That is farming protein from the wild. The skill requires reading sign, tracks, droppings, chewed bark, worn paths through underbrush. You have to think like the animal. Where does it travel? Where does it feed? Where does it bed down? Jim Bridger and the mountain men made their living, trapping beaver in the Rocky Mountains, reading waterways and dam structures the way a stockbroker reads a ticker. The animals have not changed their habits. The trails are still there. The sign is still readable. The question is whether you can still read it. Number 11. Cattail harvesting. The supermarket of the swamp. If you ever find yourself near a body of fresh water in a crisis, look for cattails. There is no wild plant in North America that provides more usable resources per square foot than the common cattail, Typha latifolia. The young shoots in spring are edible raw and taste like mild cucumber. The pollen heads produce a fine yellow flour that is high in protein. The roots contain starch that can be processed into a calorie-dense flour. The mature seed heads produce a down-like fluff that works as fire tinder, insulation for clothing, and wound dressing. The leaves can be woven into mats, baskets, and even crude shelters. The dried stalks serve as arrow shafts and hand drill spindles. FM 2176 lists cattail as one of the highest priority edible wild plants in a survival scenario precisely because of this versatility. Sacagawea and the Shoshone people harvested cattail roots as a staple carbohydrate source. The caloric yield of processed cattail root starch runs about 266 calories per 100 grams of dry flour, comparable to wheat flour. Most modern preppers walk past cattails every single day without realizing they are walking past a grocery store, a pharmacy, and a hardware store, all growing in the same ditch. The pioneers did not make that mistake. They knew every plant within a day's walk of the homestead, and cattail was near the top of every list. Number 12. Pine pitch and resin craft. Liquid gold of the forest. This is the one I told you about at the beginning. The one 99% of modern preppers have never heard of, and it might be one of the most versatile survival substances on the planet. Pine pitch is the resinous sap of coniferous trees, collected, heated, and mixed with ground charcoal and sometimes a binding agent like beeswax or dried herbivore dung. The result is a natural adhesive, sealant, and waterproofing compound that has been used for at least 8,000 years. The melting point of pine pitch runs between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius, roughly 140 to 160 Fahrenheit. Once melted and applied, it hardens into a solid that seals seams on canoes, waterproofs leather boots, patches cracked containers, hafts stone tools to wooden handles, and even serves as a crude torch fuel when wrapped around a stick with cloth. The mountain men used pitch to repair everything. A cracked gunstock, a leaking water vessel, a torn moccasin, a split canoe hull. It was the frontier equivalent of duct tape and epoxy combined. How do you make it? Find a wounded pine, spruce, or fir tree and collect the hardened or semi-liquid resin from the wound site. Melt it over low heat. Strain out debris. Mix in fine charcoal powder at roughly a 1:5 ratio. The charcoal acts as a strengthener and prevents the pitch from becoming too brittle. Some pioneers added animal fat for flexibility. Dip a stick into the mixture, and you have a pitch stick, a portable repair kit you can carry in your pack indefinitely and reheat whenever you need it. The ancient Egyptians used tree resins in mummification. The Vikings waterproofed their longships with pine tar, which is pitch heated to a higher temperature. This is not obscure knowledge. This was common knowledge for millennia. It disappeared because hardware stores replaced it. But the trees have not gone anywhere, and the resin is still flowing. Number 13. Meat smoking and jerking. How pioneers banked calories for the trail. Refrigeration is less than 150 years old as a consumer technology. Before that, humanity preserved meat through 4 primary methods: salting, drying, smoking, and fermentation. Of these, smoking is the one that gives you the best combination of preservation, portability, and flavor, and it requires nothing but a fire, a rack, and patience. The smoking process works through two mechanisms. Heat drives out moisture, which bacteria need to survive. And the phenolic compounds in wood smoke coat the surface of the meat with antimicrobial chemicals that create a protective barrier. Properly smoked meat, cut thin and dried over a low-temperature smoke between 126 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 to 24 hours, will last 2 to 3 months without refrigeration in moderate climates. The Comanche and Lakota nations perfected a sun and smoke method for bison jerky that was so effective it became the backbone of their nomadic food supply. Lewis and Clark relied heavily on smoked elk during the winter at Fort Clatsop in 1805. The technique is straightforward. Cut the meat into strips no thicker than a 1/4 inch. Remove all fat, because fat goes rancid even when dried. Hang the strips over a rack 3 to 4 feet above a smoky fire of green hardwood. Hickory, oak, mesquite, and alder all work. Maintain a low, steady smoke. Do not let it flame. And wait. The result is portable protein that weighs a fraction of the original meat and packs dense calories into every ounce. Modern dehydrators speed this up, but the fire and rack method is the one that works when the power is out and the dehydrator is a plastic box on a shelf. Number 14, reading weather by natural signs. The forecast system that never needs batteries. Before the National Weather Service, before Doppler radar, before satellite imagery, people predicted weather the same way they had for 10,000 years. They watched the sky, the animals, the plants, the wind, and the pressure changes they could feel in their bones. A ring around the moon means moisture in the upper atmosphere, ice crystals refracting moonlight, and rain or snow within 24 to 48 hours. Red sky at night means dust particles in the western sky, scattering light through clear air moving toward you. Fair weather coming. Red sky in morning means that clear air has already passed, and moisture is approaching from the west. Storm coming. Swallows flying low means insects are being pushed down by falling barometric pressure. Rain is close. Cows lying down in the field means the same thing, lower pressure, moisture approaching. FM 2176 includes a section on weather prediction by observation precisely because field soldiers cannot always access meteorological support. The pioneers knew all of this instinctively. They had to. A farmer who could not read the sky lost crops. A trapper who could not sense a blizzard coming froze in the open. And a wagon train leader who missed the signs of an early mountain winter ended up like the Donner Party. The best modern preppers are relearning this. Not to replace weather apps, but to back them up. Because when the grid goes down, the clouds will still form the same patterns they always have. The wind will still shift before a front moves through. And the birds will still tell you what is coming, if you remember how to listen. Now I need you to hear me on this. We are about to get into the final 6 skills on this list, and these are the ones that genuinely matter. The first 14 were foundational. They are the skills that keep you alive from day to day. But the next 5 are the ones that keep you alive from season to season, from year to year. And they are the ones that separate a survivor from someone who is just surviving. Number 20, the one at the very end, is the one that took me years to understand. And once you hear it, it will change how you think about every other skill on this list. If you are still here, you are already ahead of 95% of people who clicked on this video. Stick with me. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because the content I put out every week goes deeper than what most channels will ever touch. Let us keep moving. Number 15. Dugout shelter construction. The home that builds itself from the earth. When the first settlers pushed past the Mississippi into the Great Plains in the 1850s and 60s, they found a problem. There were no trees. The Great Plains stretched for hundreds of miles with almost no timber suitable for building. So, what did they do? They built with the only material they had in unlimited supply: dirt. The sod house, or soddy, was the prairie pioneer's answer to a treeless landscape. Blocks of grass-covered soil, cut from the prairie with a breaking plow, stacked like bricks into walls 18 to 24 inches thick. But before the soddy came its more primitive cousin, the dugout. A rectangular hole dug into a hillside, roofed with poles and sod, that served as shelter against wind, rain, sun, and the brutal temperature swings of the plains. FM 5103, the U.S. Army's manual on survivability and fighting positions, describes principles of below-grade shelter construction that are functionally identical to what pioneers built 160 years ago. You dig into a slope to gain 3 walls of natural earth. Earth is an extraordinary insulator. At 4 feet below the surface, ground temperature stabilizes between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, regardless of the surface weather. That means your dugout stays above freezing in January and below 80 in August without a single BTU of energy input. During the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, families who still had functional dugouts on their property survived better than those in frame houses, because the dugouts resisted the constant wind erosion and temperature extremes that destroyed conventional structures. Dick Proenneke, when he built his famous cabin in Twin Lakes, Alaska in 1968, started with a dugout-style foundation and built upward. He understood what every pioneer knew. You do not fight the ground. You work with it. Number 16, seed saving and heirloom gardening. The currency that outlasts every dollar. In 1903, the USDA catalogued roughly 8,000 named varieties of food plants being grown in America. By the 1980s, over 90% of those varieties had disappeared from commercial agriculture. Think about what that means. We lost 90% of our crop genetic diversity in 80 years. Replaced by monoculture hybrids that produce higher yields but cannot reproduce true from saved seed, require synthetic inputs, and are genetically vulnerable to any disease that evolves to target them. Pioneer families did not buy seed every spring. They saved it. Every autumn, the best fruits, the healthiest plants, the most drought-resistant stalks, those were selected, dried, stored, and planted the following year. That is not just gardening. That is selective breeding at the household level, and it produced locally adapted crop varieties that no seed catalog can replicate because they evolved over decades in that specific soil, that specific climate, that specific rainfall pattern. Genesis 3 verse 19 says, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food." That sweat included seed saving. The practice is almost alarmingly simple. Let the best specimens go to seed. Harvest the seed when dry. Store in a cool, dark, dry place with low humidity. Label and date everything. Test germination each spring by sprouting 10 seeds on a damp paper towel. If 7 or more sprout, the seed is viable. If fewer than 5, it is time to source new stock. Heirloom seeds, open pollinated varieties that breed true, are the only seeds worth saving. Hybrids will not reproduce reliably. This is the single most important food security skill a family can learn, because if you can grow food and reproduce your seed stock, you can eat indefinitely. No store, no supply chain, no government program, just soil, water, sunlight, and knowledge. Number 17. Herbal wound treatment and poultice making. Field medicine before the pharmacy existed. When Hugh Glass was mauled by a grizzly bear near the forks of the Grand River in 1823, the men who found him had no antibiotics, no surgical kit, no sterile bandages. What they had was what grew around them. Yarrow, which contains alkylic acid, a compound that promotes blood clotting. Plantain leaf, the broadleaf weed that grows in every lawn in America, which contains allantoin and aucubin, compounds that reduce inflammation and promote tissue repair. Pine resin applied directly over a wound creates a natural antiseptic barrier. These are not folk remedies. FM 425. 11. The Army's First Aid Manual acknowledges the use of improvised plant-based wound treatments when standard medical supplies are unavailable. A poultice is the simplest application. Crush fresh leaves of the target plant, apply the mash directly to the wound, and bind it with a clean strip of cloth. Change the poultice every 4 to 6 hours. The Mongolian steppe warriors used yarrow poultices on battle wounds for centuries, and the plant's Latin name, Achillea millefolium, literally references Achilles, the Greek warrior who supposedly used it to treat his soldiers' wounds during the Trojan War. This is not a replacement for modern medicine. Let me be clear about that. If you have access to antibiotics and proper medical care, use them. But if you do not, and in a true long-term crisis you very well may not, knowing which plant in your backyard can stop bleeding and which one can draw infection is knowledge that has saved human lives for thousands of years and will save them again. The pioneers did not have pharmacies. They had meadows, and they knew exactly what grew in them. Number 18. Improvised water filtration, the charcoal trick that turns swamp water into drinking water. Clean water is the single most urgent survival need after immediate shelter. You can survive 3 weeks without food. You cannot survive 3 days without water, and you will not survive long drinking water contaminated with Giardia, cholera, Cryptosporidium, or E. coli. The pioneers knew this, and they solved it the same way field engineers have solved it for centuries. Charcoal filtration. The basic Pioneer water filter uses 3 layers in a container with a drainage hole at the bottom. The first layer, coarse gravel, catches large particulates. The second layer, fine sand, catches smaller suspended solids. The third and most important layer, crushed hardwood charcoal, absorbs chemical contaminants, reduces bacterial load by roughly 80 to 90%, and removes most taste and odor compounds. The charcoal works through adsorption, not absorption. Contaminants bond to the enormous surface area of the porous carbon structure. 1 gram of activated charcoal has a surface area of up to 3,000 square meters. Even crudely made charcoal from a campfire has enough surface area to significantly clean water. The key is that filtration alone does not guarantee sterility. It removes most bacteria, but not all viruses. If possible, you should boil the filtered water for at least 1 minute, 3 minutes at elevations above 6,500 feet to kill remaining pathogens. FM 21-76 covers this 2-step process, filter, then boil, as standard field water purification. The pioneers who followed this method survived. The ones who drank straight from the creek got dysentery. And on the Oregon Trail, dysentery killed more emigrants than any other single cause. Number 19. Basic forge work and blade craft. The skill that built every tool on this list. There is a reason the blacksmith was the second most important person in any frontier town, right after the doctor and sometimes ahead of him. Every axe head, every knife blade, every hinge, every nail, every hook, every trap spring, every wagon tire, every horseshoe came from the forge. Without the blacksmith, the entire material infrastructure of pioneer life stopped functioning. Basic forge work does not require a coal-fired brick forge and a 100-pound anvil. A simple trench forge, dug into the ground, lined with clay, and fed with hardwood charcoal and manual bellows, can reach temperatures above 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to work mild steel into functional shapes. TM 31210, the military's field improvisation manual, covers expedient metalworking techniques for exactly these conditions. You heat the steel until it glows cherry red. You hammer it on any flat, hard surface. A large flat rock works. You shape it while hot. You quench it in water to harden it. And you temper it by reheating to a straw color and letting it cool slowly. That is the basic sequence for making a usable knife blade from a piece of scrap steel. Jedediah Smith carried a green river knife on his famous crossing of the Sierra Nevada, and when that blade finally broke years later, He had it reforged, not replaced, because a frontier blacksmith could make a new blade from the old steel in an afternoon. The skill is coming back. Modern bladesmiths and hobby blacksmiths are one of the fastest growing craft communities in the country because people are realizing that the ability to shape metal into tools is the meta skill. It is the skill that makes other skills possible. You cannot trap without a trap. You cannot build without nails. You cannot process a hide without a fleshing blade. And all of those things come from someone who knows how to move hot metal. Number 20. And here we are. The one I saved for last, because it is the one that makes every other skill on this list actually work. And without it, the other 19 are just interesting facts you heard on a video one time. Number 20. The pioneer mindset of radical self-reliance. This is not a technique. You cannot buy it, you cannot download it, you cannot watch a 10-minute tutorial and have it. It is a way of seeing the world that our ancestors carried in their bones, and that modern life has spent a century and a half systematically breeding out of us. And I need you to understand something. This is not nostalgia. This is not me romanticizing the past. Pioneer life was brutal, short, and full of suffering. I am not asking you to go back to 1845. I am asking you to recover the mental framework that allowed ordinary people, farmers, mothers, teenagers, immigrants who barely spoke English, to cross a continent, build homes from dirt, feed families from wild plants, and survive winters that would kill most modern Americans in 72 hours. The pioneer mindset has 3 pillars. The first is radical responsibility. When something broke on the homestead, there was no calling a repairman. There was no filing an insurance claim. There was no waiting for the government. You fixed it or you went without. Proverbs 22 verse 3 says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty." The pioneers who survived were the prudent ones. They did not wait for danger to arrive. They prepared before it came. They stored food before winter hit. They stacked firewood before the first frost. They learned skills before they needed them. That is radical responsibility. It is the absolute refusal to outsource your survival to anyone or anything outside your own competence. The second pillar is adaptive thinking. The frontier did not care about your plan. Rivers flooded. Axles broke. Children got sick. Crops failed. The people who made it were not the ones with the best plans. They were the ones who could abandon a failed plan faster than anyone else and build a new one from whatever was available. Dick Pronecker, alone in the Alaskan wilderness in 1968, spent his first weeks improvising tools from scrap, redesigning his cabin foundation 3 times when the ground behaved differently than expected, and rethinking his food strategy when his original calculations proved wrong. He did not quit. He did not freeze. He adapted, and he lived alone at Twin Lakes for over 30 years. The military calls this the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. John Boyd, the Air Force strategist who developed the concept, argued that the combatant who cycles through the OODA loop fastest wins every engagement. The pioneers were running OODA loops before Boyd was born. They just called it common sense. You look at the problem, you assess what you have, you make a decision, you act. And if the action fails, you loop back and start again. No hesitation, no paralysis, no waiting for someone else to tell you what to do. The third pillar is the longest one to build and the most important. It is what I call transmitted competence. The pioneers did not keep their skills to themselves, they taught them. Every single skill on this list, from bow drill fire to seed saving to forge work, was passed from parent to child, from neighbor to neighbor, from veteran to newcomer. Survival was never an individual project on the frontier. It was a communal inheritance. And the moment we stopped transmitting these skills, the moment we decided that the next generation did not need to know how to make soap or tan a hide or start a fire without matches, that was the moment we became fragile. Luke 22 verse 36 says, Let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. That is not a call to violence. That is a call to preparedness at any cost. The pioneers understood the cost. They paid it in labor, in learning, in hours of practice, and in the discipline of teaching what they knew so it would not die with them. And that is the skill that modern prepping is only just beginning to rediscover. Not the gear, not the gadgets, not the bunker in the backyard. The willingness to become competent, deeply competent, in the skills that keep human beings alive, and then to pass that competence on to the people you love. That is what separates a prepared family from a family with a bunch of stuff in the garage. And that is 20 buried pioneer skills, thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, tested by blizzard and drought and famine and war, validated by military field manuals and frontier diaries, and the quiet stubbornness of people who refused to die simply because the situation was hard. Here is what I want you to take away from this. Our ancestors were not superhuman. They were not carved from different stone. They were ordinary people who carried an extraordinary set of skills, and those skills were not secrets. They were common knowledge. Fire making, food preservation, shelter construction, navigation, medicine, hygiene, toolcraft, and the mindset to hold it all together. Every child knew at least half of this list by the time they were 12. We lost it in 2 generations. 2. The good news is that knowledge does not actually die. It gets buried, and buried things can be dug up. So here is my challenge to you. Pick one skill from this list. Just one. And start practicing it this week. Not next month. Not when things get bad. This week. Because the whole point of preparation is that it happens before you need it. The pioneers did not learn to make fire after the blizzard hit. They learned it in the summer, so they were ready when winter came. Which one will you start with? Are you Team Firecraft or Team Food Preservation? Drop a comment below and tell me. I read every single one, and some of the best conversations on this channel happen in the comments between people who are actually doing this work, not just talking about it. Check the description for links to field manuals, practice guides, and resources for every skill on this list. And if you found value in this, share it with someone in your family. This is the kind of knowledge that only matters if more than one person has it. Hit subscribe. Tap the bell. I will see you in the next one. And remember, the best time to learn these skills was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Stay sharp, stay prepared, stay dangerous in all the right ways.